Hello, welcome to another edition of the Intel with Greg Cosell, Jeff Mosher alongside Adam Kaplan. And with us is the star of the show, Greg Cosell, and he's going to drop the Intel once again. We had Greg on once before for this show. We're doing it again this time for the second wave of free agency, not only for the Eagles. We'll start off with the Eagles free agents, but also we'll get into the rest of the NFC and the NFL in our second part. So, Greg, amazingly, the last time we spoke, we all talked off the air about JoshUche coming to the Eagles. But apparently I forgot to actually ask you about him during the show, and we had people reach out and say, hey, what about JoshUche? But since that has happened, the Eagles
his mother called me and was very upset about it, too.
Really?
Wow. So we're going to satisfy Mama Uche. All right, we're going to make her happy. And then we're also going to talk about the other pass rusher that the Eagles have added in Azeez Ojulari. So why don't we just start off with that? Two pass rushers. Obviously, the Eagles lost Josh Sweat in free agency and, Brandon Graham likely to retire. So they needed bodies here.
Yeah, and you never have enough. We know that's one of the positions you never have enough. It's funny. I remember was it 2 years ago? Was it 2022 when Uche had the good year?
Yep.
And I remember watching, that's when the Patriots were still a pretty good football team. And I remember seeing them on a regular basis, probably saw 13 or 14 of their defensive games each week. And one of the things that really stood out to me, they were very multiple with their stunt concepts that year. And Uche was a major part of it. They used him both as a picker / penetrator, as a looper. The Patriots were really multiple in how they used their stunts. I don't know what the Eagles plan to do, but he was very, very good at that because Uche is a good athlete. I mean, I'm sure, Jeff, you remember him being a Big Ten player at the University of Michigan. I mean, he came out and people had pretty high hopes for him because he was a really good college player. He has some explosiveness to him, some bend, some flexibility. I would say it's been a little bit of a surprise that it hasn't quite worked out. Obviously, I don't know the individual. But coming off that year in 2022, it appeared that he was on his way to being a pretty good player, and it just hasn't happened, but he's one of those guys that's very intriguing to pick up in free agency. Obviously, you're not spending a lot of money, but the traits do exist in his body, and maybe with different coaching, different environment, it starts to come out, different ways of being deployed. But there's something there on his body.
And Greg, with Azeez Ojulari, I know we've talked about him a number of times over the years, and he's been on IR 3 straight years. He spent time on, so he's had injuries. But man, this guy's really talented. Greg, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and what year did he come out again?
2020. Oh no, Ojulari was. This is
21, I think. I'll double check it. He's 21.
Was he 21?
Yes, 2021. Yep.
Yeah, because I obviously he was considered a pretty strong prospect coming out that year of Georgia, and I really liked him as a prospect. I mean, I thought he has a very tapered frame. He has tremendous arm length for the fact that he's only 6'2 1/4. And one thing I've really learned over these years about edge players, offensive linemen, and speaking to more and more coaches is how they value arm length and how important it is. And he has really strong arm length. And the more I remember watching him coming out of Georgia, there's not a ton of tape of him in the league. He's been hurt a lot, but I thought his balance and body control was really high level. That allowed him to clear the edge without really losing any velocity. He can bend. He's another one of those guys that, I just thought that this guy could be a really good kind of 5'2" edge defender and then rush the quarterback in your 4-man D line. Another guy that the Eagles, it's there. This guy has traits. And pretty much everybody thought that. I'm sure you guys remember. He was viewed as a good prospect. And it just hasn't worked because of the injuries. But if you can get him healthy and give him a chance to compete and be part of a rotation. Now, obviously, all these guys, particularly guys who like Ojulari who've been injured, you've got to go through the whole offseason. He's starting from scratch, basically. But it's there, and we'll see how it plays out.
Greg, to give you an idea, guys, of how long his arms are, 34 3/8. Those are left tackle arms, okay? That is, Jeff, that is about, look at his eyes. Jeff's like, wow.
Always loved his arm. I've always thought he looked like he's one of the few guys you look at and you say, man, that guy looks like he can scratch his knees without bending down. I mean,
Yeah.
it's obvious that he has long arms.
And his wingspan is crazy too. It's 82 and a half. So he's really a long player, given that he's only 6'2" and a half. So he's a fascinating guy. And I think a lot of people anticipated that he would come into the league and be a quality edge pass rusher, and the injuries, ate him up, and he just hasn't had a chance to play very much.
Let's get back to usage with these guys, because we know, and when I say these guys, I mean both Uche and Ojulari, Greg, because we know that the Eagles and under Vic Fangio, they did stunting, almost situationally, but they weren't afraid to do it. They used it to their advantages at times. How did the Giants use? I want to know how both the different coordinators, because Martindale and Bowen are not the same. Wink Martindale and Shane Bowen, right? How did they use Ojulari either similarly or differently?
Oh God, I'm trying to remember that. I mean, I can speak more generally. They're different in their pressure concepts, totally. Right. So so I can't speak because I don't want to be incorrect. I can't remember, so I'm being honest, Jeff. But I know how the coaches coach. Bowen is much more. He's much more of a believer in sim pressures and overload pressures, whereas Martindale's always been a little more of let's just go get him. Not that he doesn't do sims, and I'm just talking in more general terms. But Ojulari is the kind of player that can win one-on-one on the edge. And what a lot of teams do now is they try to create one-on-one matchups. It's really become a matchup game. Coaches understand that very rarely do you get guys in clean. You try to do that once in a while. Very often defensive backs are involved in that when you try to get guys in clean, because they're normally not in the line of vision of offensive linemen, when it's a DB, whether it's a boundary corner or a safety that's 8 or 9 yards off the ball. So what you're trying to create more with your pressure schemes is one-on-one matchups that favor you. And, that's one of the basis of sim pressures, so people understand what a sim pressure is. It's a 4-man pressure where you drop out a defensive lineman and your 4th rusher is either a linebacker or a defensive back. So it's still a 4-man pressure. But what you often try with the way you line up your front and the player that you then bring as the 4th is you try to get him matched up on a back. So, you feel that you have the one-on-one matchup advantage. So that's what you try to do. And that's the way, I remember when I did the book with Ron Jaworski, The Games That Changed the Game, and had an opportunity to speak in depth with Dick LeBeau. And he made the point, he was talking, of course, about his zone pressures. That was the chapter in the book. But he said the whole idea was to get a really good pass rusher, a linebacker on a running back. That's what you're trying to create one-on-one favorable matchups.
Let's talk again about Uche with the Chiefs, because you would have thought that the way Spagnuolo runs his defense and being multiple up front, that there would have been some kind of good fit there between Uche and Spagnuolo, but it just never seemed.
When did he get there?
He got there, I think, 8 or 9 weeks into the season.
Yeah, and Spags' defense is not that easy to pick up in a brief amount of time. And you're in the middle of the season, you're fighting every week. I don't put that on Uche at all. That's a hard deal. Obviously he became a free agent and the Eagles signed him, but that's a hard deal because, one thing I've learned, and I've been so fortunate as you guys have as well, to speak to coaches. And when you speak to coaches, you just get such a great feel for the detail that's involved in all this. It's not just, hey, Josh, you're a good pass rusher. Just let's rush the quarterback today. It doesn't work like that, So there's so much detail in how you line up and how you have to work with others, particularly with pressure concepts. You're not a random individual player. So, that's hard to do. He'd almost have to go through an entire training camp to really understand how he could best be deployed in a Spags defense. And obviously he's not getting that opportunity.
And we remember, this was a long time ago, when Spags came to the Giants originally, and it was tough. The players were not getting the defense. It took them a while to understand it, as Michael Strahan has talked about before.
Yeah.
I remember, just to give people an example, I was very fortunate, as some people may know, because I've spoken about this before, that the year Spags was out, he came to films every Monday, pretty much every Monday during that season, and was watching tape in the next room. And of course, I asked him a zillion questions. He probably thought I was the biggest pain in the ass in the world. I'd ask him a zillion questions, and I'd show him film of his defense, because the Chiefs were always pretty good, and he'd say, and I'd say, boy, that you're playing quarters there, right? And he goes, no. It looks like that, but it's not. The rules are totally different, and that just, so people can understand that there's so many different rules in all these different defenses that it's not that easy to pick up.
Right. So it'll be a clean slate for both Uche and Ojulari. But Adam, we've talked about quite a bit that the free agency doesn't stop today or tomorrow. There'll be plenty of opportunities to keep adding. The one thing that jumps out, though, is Ojulari at best have been designated pass rushers.
Yep.
Jalen Hunt was used as one last year. He wasn't a starting defensive end when the season began. I mean, he had to play a lot of snaps down the stretch, but even still was not a starter. So, Adam, when we kind of forecast what the Eagles are going to look like going into the year, there still isn't someone, opposite Nolan Smith, right, who you feel comfortable about. Like who starts? They'll have to work that way out. And again, there are other names that can be brought in. But right now, the Eagles have a bunch of situational guys, and you wonder where they're going to go for whether it's someone that we're talking about already or somebody else that's going to be someone who can play 50 to 55% of the snaps right away.
Well, a couple things here. So Bryce Huff is still on the football team. I know it's hard to believe because he was invisible. He is still under contract. If they don't move him, he'll be with them. And then you mentioned Jalen Hunt, who really closed the season well. He's, and this is a good thing, he leaves you wanting to see more because it was so good to end the season. You wonder, on your point, how much can he handle? But let's remember, with the draft coming up, Uche's on a 1-year deal. Ojulari's on a 1-year deal. So you've got Nolan Smith and Hunter, the guys who are going to be here for a while. So it doesn't preclude them from actually drafting somebody. They don't have to.
Right.
Because as you're pointing out, they have enough for a rotation. But the draft is always about the future. And you don't know about either Uche or Ojulari yet. But I would say about Ojulari, he was actually a starter at one point earlier in his career, but he got hurt, as Greg mentioned. And Uche, look, now he's still young. You run into situations. It wasn't an injury problem. It's just a lack of production going down and down and down, where you worry about that, certainly. And he signed for a deal of less than $2 million. So that kind of tells you where he's at. He's got a lot to prove.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, so that's the edge picture for the Eagles right now. Greg, the Eagles keep raiding the Giants of all teams, right? Saquon Barkley last year, Azeez Ojulari, and then they go and get Adoree Jackson, the veteran corner, who I joke with Adam. I actually thought the guy was 34 because it feels like he's been in the league so long, but he's only 29 right now. He will be 30 when for the season. But what do you remember, or what did the tape show, at least last year, on Adoree Jackson, who I believe joined the Giants really late, like right before the start of the season?
Yeah. Another guy that was in and out. I actually, to be honest, I actually spoke with someone in the organization yesterday, believe it or not. And, he's signed, but the feeling is right now, and again, this can all change. And then it all also depends on who you talk to, as you guys know. I mean, different people in an organization have different points of view. But right now, the feeling seems to be in the organization that they want Kelee Ringo to be the starter opposite Mitchell. That Jackson was not necessarily brought in automatically to be the starter opposite Mitchell.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you guys have heard anything different, but, I think that's where Adoree Jackson kind of is in his career. I mean, can you line him up and play? Yeah, he's an NFL corner, but, he's not the answer necessarily. It's funny. I don't know. This just popped into my head. I remember him because he came out of USC. And he was always a burner. I mean, that was his thing. He was super fast. And I remember his matchups with John Ross. And those were fun to watch because those were two guys that could really, really run. And I remember Ross, I think, getting on top of him and, back when they were in college and for a long touchdown. But I'm very curious to see how that plays out, guys, because I think if they have their druthers, if it works out the way I think people want it to work out, Keely Ringo would be the starting corner opposite Quinyon Mitchell.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because we have to remember last summer, Ringo's clearly beaten out by Isaiah Rodgers. It was over pretty quickly, but Ringo's going to get another full off season to show what he could do. Now, we should also mention Adoree Jackson's on a 1-year deal.
Yep.
This does not preclude them from drafting a corner early. Then you've got the Cooper DeJean situation, though our belief is they're going to play him at nickel for now. They could change their mind. But our belief as of now that he'll be a nickel player. So they're kind of light at outside corner. Let's call it like it is. You got Rick still on the roster, Jeff, as I said, and back to you. But there's an opportunity here clearly for Ringo as of now to be a starter.
It's so funny. It's so funny how things work out, because you know who ended up leaving the Eagles and playing really well in Seattle was Josh Jobe.
I know.
He played really well in Seattle, and right now he's penciled in as their nickel corner because Witherspoon plays on the outside in their base, but then Witherspoon goes inside, and Jobe plays outside opposite Woolen, and he played really well last year. It's funny how things work out.
Yeah. Greg, I would say to expand on the sense that we've gotten is that, yes, the Eagles, it's year 3 for a drafted player, so it's time to see
right
if Keely Ringo can seize this job, but he has been described to us at times as someone, and you've broken it down the same way, as someone who's stiff-hipped, he's tall.
And that won't change. That's an athletic trait. That's not going to change. But again, he's not the only corner in the NFL that's a little stiff. You can play. And that's why I think Jackson got signed, because you certainly can line him up and play him. He's a starting NFL corner that you can line up and play for sure. And in some ways, it's like when they signed Isaiah Rodgers. You know that you can line up and play with Adoree Jackson if need be.
Is there any tape of his past? Has Adoree ever played inside in the nickel spot?
Don't know the answer to that. My guess is yes, that he has, just because he's a smaller player and he's got great quickness. Obviously he's a great athlete. I mean, he's got great quickness. He's loose-hipped. Easy transition skills, change of direction. I mean, was he a first-round pick?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a first-round pick.
Yep.
So, I mean, we're dealing with a guy. And he was a first-round pick, as I recall, on merit. Nobody reached for him. So, obviously, he's a little later in his career, and he's moved around a bit. But he certainly has traits.
Okay. I was just curious because he does seem with the shorter body but stronger. And
the Cooper DeJean thing is the most fascinating element here, as Adam mentioned. And, I guess we don't know what they're going to do. But boy, he was so good in the slot. But we'll see. Right.
Okay, let's go over to the offense. The Eagles signed 2 tight ends, both HarrisonBryant and Kylen Granson. HarrisonBryant coming over from a year with the Raiders after starting his career with the Browns. Greg, this is a guy whose pro numbers don't exactly match what he did in college when he won the Mackey Award last year at FAU and went for over 1,000 yards. What does the tape show on him?
I liked him coming out of college a lot. He was, he wasn't one of those special receiving tight ends, the guys you go, oh my God, this guy, he's just unbelievable. But he was a really good receiving tight end that certainly had plus movement ability. You wouldn't put him, like I said, in the top level, but he was a 3-level dimension as a receiver in college. He was a detached player. Obviously, he then played quite a bit with the Browns, who run the ball, so he played a lot of attached and had to block. And, he gave effort. I mean, that's probably not the absolute strength of his game, but he worked at it. I always thought he was a really intriguing player. And another one of those guys, the way this often works, as you guys know, is when teams sign guys like that, very often it's a scout in the building who's been either with the team or with another team that really liked the player coming out. And they feel that, hey, if we get him and we coach him and we maybe put him in a somewhat different situation, that the traits that we saw when he was in college that we all liked can really come to fruition now. And he's another one of those guys. I always thought he was a really good receiver. Like, he's not at the level of Dallas Goedert in terms of movement ability and everything that goes with being a tight end in the passing game, but he's a notch below. And I always thought he was that kind of guy. And, again, he's moved around a little, but he's that's an intriguing sign. And of course, we all know that they're trying to trade Dallas Goedert. And I guess, Jeff, you would mention that they've given him permission to seek a trade. So obviously they need to replenish the tight end situation. So they did so with Bryant and with Granson.
Well, let's talk about that other fourth rounder, Kylen Granson, Greg, from the Colts. What do you know about him? What do you like?
Yeah, another guy. He's a receiving tight end. I remember him coming out. I believe that he played at two schools. I believe SMU was his final stop. I did him coming out of college. He's a receiving tight end. He's a detached player more than an attached player. He's not really an inline blocker. He's a movement tight end. Good receiver, though. He's clearly a good receiver. That's his game. And you can do a lot of different things with him as a receiver. So that's what he is. There's no mystery to what Granson is. You're not going to ask him to do what he's not. He's not an attached blocking tight end, the strong side run game. That's not who he is.
So he profiles similarly to another SMU guy that the Eagles already have in Grant Calcaterra.
To some degree. Calcaterra is longer because Granson's not tall.
Right.
But yeah, somewhat similarly, yes.
In fact, a coach I spoke with thought Granson would be an H-back when he.
Yeah, he's kind of like that.
Yeah, because he's under 6'2".
Yeah,
but he can move and he can run. So
yeah, and you can line him up, Adam, like you said, in many places within the formation. He's that kind of player.
Jeff, this is interesting because you've got yet another new play caller for the Eagles with Kevin Patullo.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. Maybe we'll get an idea. Andrew and I will go to OTAs, and hopefully you'll go, and we'll see. We'll see what they do in OTAs with him. We'll see if they move him around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the Eagles got a little younger and more athletic, bringing in both Bryant and Granson, because last year when Goddard was hurt, they would throw guys like CJ Uzama out there, and
right?
EJ Jenkins had to play a little bit. Jack Stoll was in there and is now with New Orleans Saints. Not that he was old, but they've added. The way you describe Harrison Bryant intrigues me, Greg, because he can block a little bit. Had to play for a run-first offense. He can catch the ball. I feel like that's a Pat Fryer move. Somebody who can block a little, adequately, but can also catch the ball. Probably not going to stress you vertically 20 or 30 yards downfield, but, gets the job done where tight ends get the job done.
I mean, I remember seeing him. I can picture plays in my head from a couple of years ago when he was with the Browns, and they'd run him on intermediate and vertical type routes, and he can do that. And I thought he could do that coming out of college. He was a receiver, a really good receiver coming out of college.
And erratic, Jeff, a little bit.
What's
not
that?
A lot, but inside handoffs.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's, again, another guy that's not old and maybe changes scenery. And again, if Goddard is not an Eagle, then the tight end position is kind of wide open. And it's up for grabs through OTAs, minicamp, training camp. We'll see how it plays out.
All right, that'll do it. Unless, Greg, of course, you want to give us a really detailed, thorough tape breakdown on the new long snapper, Charlie Hewitt. Other than that, well, if not, we can just end it right here.
Let's save that for 2029.
Yeah. When is the void years, Jeff?
Yeah.
Sounds like a good idea. We'll just save that. We'll do a full hour on Charlie.
Right.
Williams, the returner who has played a little bit of running back and a little bit of corner, but not much of either. We can do that some other time. All right, that's good stuff for the Eagles free agents that they brought in. From Greg Cosell and for Adam Kaplan, I'm Jeff Mosher. You've been watching the Intel with Greg Cosell.